All right, so we're in the middle of wrapping up our unit on factoring, and we're talking about the last shortcut, the last method for factoring that we're learning, how to factor something that's a difference of squares, okay? So I've already made a video where we talk about how to multiply conjugate pairs to make a difference of squares using the shortcut. Now in this video, we're going to talk about how to use the shortcut to factor a difference of squares back into the conjugate pairs. There is going to be a third video. In the third video, I'll show you how to factor it using grouping, which is our normal method. So for those of you who don't want one more rule to memorize with this shortcut, you can skip from this to the third video and just watch the third video on how to use grouping. Also, if you're someone who needs some practice with grouping, even if you are going to use this shortcut, you still might want to watch that third video just to get a little more practice with grouping. All right, so with that said, let's get this video started. What we're talking about here is multiplying and factoring difference of squares. Well, we already talked about multiplying conjugate pairs. That's done. Now we're talking about how to factor a difference of squares, specifically utilizing this shortcut right here. So when we're factoring, we're working through this shortcut in reverse. We're going to start with something that looks like two things that have been squared and subtracted. And we're going to use this pattern to rewrite it as two things being multiplied together, because that's what factoring does, is it unmultiplies. All right, so with that said, let's get started. Here's example number 1. In our first example, we're going to take 25x squared minus 81 and factor that. Okay, so in our pattern, what we've said is we want to recognize that this came from squaring the first thing in our conjugate pairs. So to unsquare it, I'm going to do the square root of that thing. So the square root of 25x squared is 5x. Then the next thing I want to recognize is that that 81 came from squaring the second thing that was in my conjugate pair. So to undo that squaring process, I'm going to square root 81. Square root of 81 is 9. Okay, now the last part was just to use the structure. The structure said we're going to end up with conjugate pairs, which means we're going to get one set of parentheses that has a 5x and a 9, and a second set of parentheses that also has a 5x and a 9, because conjugate pairs have the same terms in them. The difference between conjugate pairs is one will have a plus sign and one will have a minus. And so that's my answer. My basic process, take those square roots to find my two numbers. The same numbers go in both parentheses, just give one of them a plus and one of them a minus. And that's how we use our shortcut. All right, let's do one more with the shortcut, and then that'll be it for this video. All right, so let's suppose that we have x squared minus 100. X squared minus 100. So we've done the video where I explain why the shortcut works, and in that video there were some examples. Now I've worked through another example in this video. Hopefully you've got enough that you can try this one on your own. So you should pause the video now and give this a try using the shortcut. All right, so hopefully you've done this with the shortcut. You should have recognized that the first thing that we want to do is take the square root of what comes first so that we can figure out what was the first thing in our parentheses. So the square root of x squared, well, that's equal to x. So in my parentheses, the first thing must have been an x. Oops, sorry, you can't see that. There we go. So I took the square root of x squared, I got an x. That tells me that in my parentheses, the first thing must have been an x. Then I'm going to take the square root of 100 to figure out what comes next in my parentheses. So the square root of 100, well, that's equal to 10. So that's what comes next in my parentheses and in both sets, because the parentheses are the same except for the signs. And so that's where we finish. I give one of them a plus, one of them a minus, and there's my answer. Okay, so this is the basic technique of how to utilize the difference of squares rules as a shortcut to factor these types of problems. Like I said, I'm about to produce a third video where we do this same type of problem, but we do it with grouping instead. So if you would rather use grouping, watch that third video, or even if you just need a little more practice. Thanks for watching this one. Have a good one.